Avis, cette capsule a été produite simultanément en français et en anglais. Notice, this episode was produced simultaneously in English and French. Vous écoutez présentement la version anglaise. You are currently watching the English version.
Hello and welcome to Stereotypic STeist. I'm your host, Guy from the other day. It's while searching among the classics that I decided to talk about a strategy and conquest game that is one of the good ones designed for or ported on the Atari ST. Developed and published by Infogrames in 1989, this game is North and South. Before digging into the game, I'd like to talk a little about the comic book series that inspired it, Les Tuniques Bleues, or Bluecoats in English.
These are comic books of Belgian origin, recounting the adventures of two Yankee soldiers, Chesterfield and Bluch, in the American Civil War context. That is to say, during the years from 1861 to 1865. They are therefore fighting for the Union, thus against the Confederacy, whose states were located further south of present-day USA. Also, due to the humorous nature of the comic, it took me a while to become interested in the game North and South, which I shunned for a long time, considering it a remake of the game The Ancient Art of War or even Defender of the Crown, but with more attractive visuals and sounds for the ST version.
And it's somewhat true. A game based on a comic book couldn't be good, could it? Perhaps?
Don't let the visuals fool you. If the game doesn't take itself seriously, it remains serious in its endeavor of strategy and conquest. This is a WDID and a WDIG and not a PUAP at all. You need to read the instruction manual to understand what to do or what keys to press. Even after the title screen, the options menu doesn't say much about what does what, so I'll explain it briefly. The images at the top, left and right are used to set who is playing against whom and for which side. By default, it's human versus computer, and the humans fight for the Union. In the center is the year at which the game starts, 1861 to 1864 inclusively. Each year has an impact on the number of armies and territories held by each side. For beginners, I recommend starting the game in 1864. Just above at the top are illustrated icons representing disasters. The Indians mode implies that native tribes can also attack, not to mention Mexicans, who can strike the state of Texas. Storms or thunderstorms or whatever constitute mobile risks which, when hovering over an occupied territory, prevent armies from mobilizing or moving. Finally, European reinforcements mean that the side which holds the state of Virginia will be able to receive reinforcements by boat, either to constitute a new army or to reinforce an existing army.
Also, the leader's visual for each side sets the difficulty level. Again, the game is not a PUAP. You have to read the instruction manual to understand.
The strategy versus arcade icons ultimately determine whether you want to control the battle sequences between North and South, as well as those involving a train, not to mention those taking place in a fort. In one of them, the fate is determined randomly, but taking into account your forces or strength, that is to say the size of your infantry, cavalry, and artillery.
The rest essentially has to do with conquering territories. Like in the game Risk, the more you own, the more your income increases.
North and South consists of a turn-based strategy game, meaning that each side takes turns playing. Each turn, a player can move all or part of his armies to a neighboring territory, whether occupied or not. Once you finish playing, the round automatically ends and the opponent can play. If you choose to end the turn without having moved any army, or just a few, you can click on the month and year strip at the bottom of the screen, signifying that it's time for the opponent to play.
You can also cancel a move when it's your turn to play.
Conquering a territory depends on a few factors. If the territory is unoccupied, we simply move an army there, and a flag will appear on the vacant territory left behind. On the other hand, if we move our army to an enemy territory that is unoccupied, meaning there is no army there, the enemy flag disappears, but is not immediately replaced with our own flag. Obviously, if we move our troops into an occupied enemy territory, we engage in a battle. If the attacker wins the battle, the territory changes sides.
So far, nothing out of the ordinary, but that's not all.
In the event that an enemy territory is occupied by enemy troops and has a town/fort, you must win the battle against the enemy army and fight your way inside the fort. Finally, if the territory only has one town/fort but no enemy army, you must still fight your way in the fort to conquer the territory.
It's a bit like in Defender of the Crown when you build a castle on one of your territories.
Obviously, since the number of infantry, cavalry, and artillery matters in our conquest endeavor, we can simply merge some of them by moving one of our armies to a neighboring territory also occupied by an allied army.
But unlike in the game Risk or Defender of the Crown, you cannot leave a portion of an army behind to defend a conquered territory in the event of an attack.
Speaking of attacking, battles take place when we move, for instance, one of our armies into a territory occupied by an enemy army. We then switch to battle mode, and the outcome depends a lot on the size of the armies, whether we play in arcade or strategy mode. We can also attack an enemy territory with several of our armies. We just have to keep in mind that the total of infantry, cavalry, and artillery cannot exceed a certain maximum: 18 for infantry, 9 for cavalry, and 3 for artillery. The surplus remains in place in the original territories.
We can also opt out or retreat. Nothing is gained, but at least what remains of our infantry, cavalry, and or artillery is preserved.
As in Defender of the Crown, each turn, more precisely at the end of each turn, depending on the number of territories you have, you receive a certain number of bags of gold, provided you have 2 cities or forts connected by a railway. As soon as you have 5 bags of gold, a new army is created, made up of 6 infantrymen, 3 cavalrymen, and 1 artillery. The new army is placed on a territory which does not already have an army in it, and which has a railway.
You can also steal the opponent's tax revenue.
To achieve this, you simply block the railway between 2 enemy cities or forts so that there is no other accessible passage. On one occasion, and only one, the train will try to make it through regardless. In this case, we move on to a platform phase, let's say, in which we must reach the front of the train and order the driver to stop the convoy. This portion of the game is controlled using the keyboard or the joystick, whichever you prefer. The fire button, or spacebar if you're using the keyboard, allows you to throw a knife at an enemy, unless you are in melee mode, in which case you throw a punch.
The number of available knives depends on the difficulty level of the game, and this applies to the time available to reach the locomotive.
As for towns or villages, these are protected by forts, and as with the train sequences, the invasion of a fort takes us into platform game mode, in which time is also limited, and in which the controls are the same as those in the train platform segment or phase, let's say.
If you think it's easy, wait until you see the battles between enemy camps.
It's played using the joystick along with the keyboard or solely using the keyboard. In single-player mode, nothing complicated, but all very frustrating. The right shift key allows you to select what you wish to control, infantry, cavalry, or artillery. But unlike the computer, you can't control everything at once, which makes it hard to coordinate your army. The spacebar is used to shoot. However, for artillery, if we keep it pressed, a gauge at the top of the screen tells us the range of the projectile. It's not that difficult to shoot at the right distance. The problem is that enemy units keep moving, so very often your well-aligned cannonball doesn't hit anything at all.
And you have 9 cannonballs. If you exhaust them, your artillery will leave the battlefield, which also applies to the enemy's artillery.
Finally, it's possible to seize or capture an enemy territory without fighting by encompassing it, so to speak, provided that there is no enemy army or fort.
Once again, very straightforward regarding the endeavor, but not at all that easy as a game, even in easy mode.
North and South is full of merits, both in its concept and in the visual and sound aspects. If we don't take into account its comic book inspiration, it remains visually effective and neat, even if it's perhaps aimed at a more adolescent audience. I can't really tell. Just consider the different animations that are sometimes evocative of cartoons. Sound-wise, we use the noise channel rather than the tone channels, which means that the sound environment is completely digitized, and that's a good thing. Nothing fancy, and for the time, it's something I expected from a game for the Atari ST, digital sound effects.
And of course, I have to say a word about the program itself.
Since the speed of code execution is not crucial, the game could have been coded using an interpreter before being compiled. There is nothing really rocket science that a programming neophyte couldn't accomplish. As one would expect, the horizontal scrolling, when it happens, is done in chunks of 64 bits for 16 pixels, quite simply because North and South is not exclusively a platform game, and that the platform sequences are, in any case, rather short. It's not like in the game Gods, for example, which displays scrolling in all directions throughout the entirety of the game, and in which scrolling constitutes one of the most remarkable aspects of /4, the ST version.
But when it comes to the gameplay of these platform portions, we are far from Super Mario Bros.
These are parts or portions in which it's more intuitive to play using the joystick, even if up is used to go up or jump forward, while the button is used to throw a dagger or to throw a punch. All this takes practice. This is also true regarding the battle sequences. As we play, we end up becoming faster and more efficient in controlling our army, infantry, cavalry, and artillery, although I find the infantry more accommodating. Near the end of a battle, if we only have infantry against the opposing camp's artillery, we just have to avoid the shots until the opponent runs out of cannonballs.
And in terms of replayability?
North and South is exemplary in this regard, as it offers options that make each game different from the previous. Certainly, the strategies of the artificial intelligence prove to be somewhat predictable, not only at the start of each game, but also during the game. Note that this is not much different from the AI strategies in Defender of the Crown, except that there is more than one antagonist to consider in the latter. What adds to the replayability and makes the game a little more challenging are the additional options, Indians/Mexicans, storms, and reinforcements.
This being said, I hesitated to present to you some competing versions of the game, in particular that of the Amiga, but here it is.
There are a few notable differences, but the main one is the sound. There are more sound effects in the Amiga version, which I find difficult to explain unless the Amiga version came after the SD version and we went all out, or the SD version came after the Amiga version and we would have been restricted due to memory constraints.
Notwithstanding, having done better in both cases, ultimately,
the comic book visual aspect is a gimmick, but I don't find it distracting or disturbing, opposing to what I thought before I acquired the game. This reinforces its non-serious standpoint. The game, as well as the comic book series, is not intended to be a sad and dark reproduction of the American Civil War, during which at least 620,000 people perished. However, I would have opted for more game options and favorable or disastrous hazards, not to mention the possibility of mobilizing fractions of armies from one territory to another rather than entire armies, as in Risk, as well as better controls for the train and fort segments. I'm not saying that we should have had platform phases as advanced as those in Aladdin, especially its arcade version, but I would have appreciated something a little more fluid, say, in which the player's dexterity and reflexes are taken into account.
North and South remains no less spectacular as it is, and not only for the time.
Certainly, strategy and conquest games were once very popular, and they still are, for there are still some that are being made to this day at the time of the release of this episode, whether for computers, consoles, or tablets. It's a genre that's aimed at a wide audience and almost all age groups, meaning the youngest, those born after the year 2006, let's say, as well as the elders, that is, people born before the baby boom of the 1940s. Of course, the strategy and conquest aspects, the latter in particular, are more fleshed out in Sid Meier's Civilization, which game offers more options to promote its replayability, but for all practical purposes, Civilization and North and South are two different types of strategy and conquest games. Deciding which one is better is a matter of preference.
This was today's episode. As usual, thanks to my patrons. If you'd like to support me, the link is in the description. Otherwise, like, subscribe, share, and don't hesitate to write in the comments your impressions regarding the game North and South. How did you first hear about it? Do you find it easy? Do you still play it? Also, if there are any games you'd like me to talk about, whether they're on my list or not, let me know. I'm Guy from The Other Day. See you soon.